Welcome to Project Chatter, the podcast where PPM experts from various sectors talk about the latest trends. Listen to Val and Dale as they talk about tried and tested best practices and share their unfiltered thoughts about the industry. Whether you're here to learn how to progress your career, improve your project control skills, or just want to hear an Aussie and South African rant about projects, then you've come to the right place. Welcome to the Project Chatter podcast with your hosts, Dale Fung and Val Matthews.
In this episode, I speak to Micah Piippo about how to be a world-class scheduler without opening the schedule. Micah Piippo is the CEO of Movar US and a leading voice in construction planning, scheduling, and project delivery. He brings deep industry expertise from roles at Intel and Google, where he led strategic initiatives in capital project execution, infrastructure planning, and technology integration. At Intel, Micah drove on-time delivery across verticals by modernizing planning practices and advancing organizational culture. At Google, he built the data center scheduling program and co-founded the computer vision in construction team, which automated tasks and delivered multi-million-dollar savings. So I was flying solo, so to speak, in the host seat, but Micah was absolutely amazing once again. We've had him on a couple of times before on the podcast. And he really has this ability to break down the art of scheduling or planning, as we know it in the UK, for all to understand and be able to use practically as well in their various roles on projects and project execution. Now, he delivers a lot of what he speaks about on this episode in training. So if you are eager, please do reach out to Micah. But I'm not going to spoil it anymore for you. So I'll leave it there. As we say, keep listening, keep liking, and keep paying it forward. Hello, project people, and welcome back to another episode of the Project Chatter podcast. We keep them coming. They're coming thick and fast, and we promised you season 9 would be bigger, would be better. We keep rolling with the celebs. We have another celeb guest on this show. He's the king of scheduling or planning, whichever you prefer. Micah Piippo, no stranger to the Project Chatter podcast. How are you, sir?
Doing well, and maybe I should go back in time and get on season 3 because I don't know if I'm elevating season 9 or bringing it down.
You're certainly bringing it up. You are doing incredibly well, putting scheduling and planning at the forefront, certainly from a knowledge sharing, thought provoking perspective. You're putting lots out there in terms of, what a scheduler is and isn't. But you brought an interesting topic to the table. Before we jump into that though, what's some of the things you're seeing? I mean, you've been doing incredibly well with Beyond Deadlines. I know you sort of helped Greg Lawton write his book as well. What are some of the trends you're seeing before we dive into the topic when it comes to project planning and scheduling?
Well, at the forefront right now, I hate to be cliche, but all the rage is AI. So anything that has to do with AI, generative planning, helping to operationalize and automate processes, all super big right now. Then I would say after that, there's been a big push I've seen of getting back to what I'll call the basics of the fundamentals. You're seeing a resurgence of EVM. You're seeing a resurgence, well, not a resurgence, but just a growing, I would call execution-based construction with lean, tact, line of balance. So I think in the beauty of the internet and spreading of knowledge, I think some of these fundamentals are starting to rise and grow as well. So it's kind of cool to see these now two intersect in technology and fundamentals.
It's kind of interesting when you bring up all these different techniques is that when we started the Project Chatter podcast and as we went through the different seasons, we had folks, seasoned professionals, right? And we brought what we thought were new ideas to them. And they sort of, at the edge of retirement, they're going, we've done this before. I feel like we're getting to that age now where we're like, yeah, we discussed this about 10 years ago. And now we're unpacking these things as almost if they're new with this technology label. Anyway, that's just my observation. I don't know if you
really nice way of calling me old. Thank you very much for that. Now, there's a bit of that, but I guess to me, what was once viewed as hard, like cost loading a schedule, I guess what I'm talking about has nothing really to do with like AI or new technology. I'm just seeing more people get into it and invest the time and the capability to go deliver their projects for whatever reason. And it may be just because I'm following more people on LinkedIn and the algorithms are feeding me that stuff, but it's also rooted in some very real conversations I have with project leaders and what people are looking to get out of their projects.
Yeah, we are extremely fortunate because of the platforms we have and also because of being known that people want to share and discuss things with us. And that's incredibly fortunate. And I think sometimes you're right. We sometimes find ourselves in echo chambers and we don't realize that we are, because we'll be discussing things that have been discussed before. And I don't know why my camera's gone out of focus, but it has. For those of you that are listening.
Do the hand to it and then bring your hand to your face. Did it get it? No, I don't know.
It'll fix itself in due course. Maybe it just doesn't like my face, but it's good comedy for the podcast anyway,
There
if
you
you're
go.
listening. So let's jump into the topic, because I think this is a really, really interesting topic that you brought to the table. And it is how to be a world-class scheduler without opening the schedule. And I guess just to caveat that, when you say scheduler in America, you mean scheduler/planner. Am I correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard for me to constantly be saying two different words all of the time. So what I mean by that is being a planner and a scheduler. The full planning of the project, the actual scheduling of it, the execution of it. But for this, there we go, crystal clear. Yeah, there you are. But for this, it's this is what I was thinking of mostly. There are always far more project leaders in the room than there are schedulers. And one of the biggest superpowers that I see not being nurtured or developed is planning and scheduling techniques across project managers, across quantity surveyors, across procurement experts. And some of these things are very easy to pick up and learn, and it can really elevate not only your career, but your project team. And that's where I thought this topic could really hit for a couple people.
Yeah, and the how-to topic is always one that intrigues people. Like, how do I do this? And I think particularly in the project control space, because that's why we do what we do. We're curious, like, how does that happen? Why did that happen? And so for those that are curious listening to this and perhaps not ever open Primavera P6, other tools exist. Um, what Where do they start? So how do you become a world-class scheduler without opening the schedule?
It's a great point. And I'm going to say Primavera P6 a lot just because it's an industry standard. But what I'm saying, it goes across all tools and techniques. So whether maybe you're an Asta Power project or Microsoft project, don't get hung up on the tools here. To be a world class at anything, you need to start by understanding what are the principles. Like, what are the base foundation things that if you understand, everything gets easier. So I would start with, at the very beginning, understand what does a planner and scheduler do? And if we break that down, you're probably going to end up, and for this conversation, I'm going to simplify a lot of things, but I think it'll help people kind of, move with the conversation. You typically have two different types of schedulers. And let me add in one more caveat again. I'm going to say the word scheduler every time, and I mean planner or scheduler. So just bury your hatchet with that. I can't always do it across the podcast. I'm just going to say scheduler. I'm an American. Sorry. So there's usually two types of schedulers. The first would be an owner scheduler, and then the second would be a GC scheduler. So the two differences there, an owner will maybe set up a high-level schedule and get a high-level plan going, and then a GC scheduler is the full builder of the scheduler. And then once that plan starts to shift from owner to GC scheduler, then that GC scheduler will be doing the progress updates and sending the reports. And then the owner scheduler will be more of an auditor, reviewer, quality checker, making sure the rules are followed. So that's the first place I would start. What does your scheduler do? And then you need to go, those two different types of scheduler. Okay, well, what do they do across the project lifecycle? I've already mentioned a piece of that. Owner schedule is going to create that high-level schedule. That's going to start kicking off progress reviews where the schedule gets updated. They give you reports on what needs to be delivered. There's a whole function there. Okay. And then eventually you're going to get to where you're going to bring a GC on board. The owner scheduler should create a specification for you of what the GC should be following, the rules of scheduling. They should be helping you start to tee up that RFP process. So when you hire a GC, they're not terrible or they don't have a scheduling department. And then they'll help score and validate and walk through that RFP process. And then it'll transition over when you award that GC. That GC scheduler should be owning the baseline creation process to deliver that contractual schedule. They then, the GC scheduler will then, after that, let's say you agree to the baseline, will then progress the schedule. So they're going to have the progress meetings where they capture all the progress, they review it, and provide the reports. And then, like I said before, your owner scheduler is sitting there giving you the analysis and back into it. So I hope that, I know that was a little bit of a long explanation, but I really wanted to make crystal clear about what is the role of the scheduler on the.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. If I can do a little bit of translation for the UK listeners, owner scheduler in the UK would be often referred to as the client-side planner, and the GC or general contractor is the contractor, the main contractor in the UK. So the main contractor planner. I think the other thing to add, which is an interesting aspect of the UK specifically, a lot of it is to do with NEC contracts as well. And planners play a specific role when it comes to contractor planner versus client planner. But the distinction is still similar in terms of what you're saying and where you're going with it. Yeah, it's one of those where the fundamentals don't really change.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes total sense.
So, okay. So in terms of those fundamentals, if I'm, let's say I'm the QS, right? And I'm in the room and I want to find out how the schedule is impacting what I'm doing. And I want to be the world-class scheduler. What are some of the things I should be looking out for, thinking about, asking perhaps as well? Because we've all been in those project meetings where someone asks a question and it's not the right question, but because they've asked it in such a way that it makes everyone else think that the question is valid, and then the wrong answer comes out. So, I mean, and you don't want to embarrass anyone by saying that's not the right question to be asking. So let's do it on the podcast. What are some of the embarrassing questions you shouldn't be asking?
There is such a laundry list of, I think one of my favorite ones I think I've ever had been asked to me was I had created a high level client side IMS type schedule for multiple data center projects. And we would take the output of those high level schedules, the milestones, put them into a presentation to review for management. I had someone ask me, is there any way that we could just update the milestone date in the presentation and have it then update the schedule?
What did you say?
My brain just melted, kind of walking back how that destroyed all processes and procedures and everything like that. But I think for anyone to start, I think people want to dive into the weeds right away, and they want to get into the P6 and PDFs and logic and blah, blah, blah. And I think that's where things start to blow up. Because remember, the whole point of this is for you not to be the builder of the schedule. So I would always recommend people take a couple steps back and let's just cover the next kind of, I would say, key fundamentals for that person. The schedule is a mathematical calculation. Okay. That's how it's all built. It's got variables, it's got logic, and it creates a forecast. Okay. That's how a schedule works. And people need to really understand that then all of the pieces that add up equal that. And you can have good mathematical formulas and have bad ones. And so by kind of what does a scheduler do? Here's how a formula works, and this is what the schedule overall is. The next phase that I would go is, well, okay, how do you set up a good scheduling organization, or how should a good scheduling organization be set up? Because oftentimes these project leaders or project managers or construction directors, and they're setting up their project team, right? And so what I look at, right, is just simple framework, people, process, tools. So when you go hire a scheduler, what should you be looking for? Tool-wise, what's the tools we're going to be using in our company? And then process-wise, what are those processes that we're going to use at each phase of the kind of delivery model that I just described?
How much, sorry if I jump in there, Micah. You're talking about hiring a scheduler. How much do you put on the knowledge, the domain knowledge of the actual thing that's being built?
It depends what role you're hiring for. That's it's a thing where I would lay out, well, what tools are we using, and what processes are we going to hit? Because there's certain scenarios where you probably don't need a ton of domain knowledge, or maybe you're in an industry that's brand spanking new and you're not going to get a lot of knowledge into it. So I think there's a lots to consider, and the team you're building, it shouldn't just be, I want to find the greatest planner or scheduler that knows everything there is to know about data centers. No, it's, well, hold on a second. What if we're using some tools that are really good at automation of reporting and things like that? Maybe I don't need to hire certain skill sets, right? Or maybe I'm leveraging, cameras out on site and doing automated progress. Well, I don't necessarily need this skill set or that skill set. Or maybe I want all of this data to help improve my future projects because I'm building a program, I'm building a portfolio. Well, that is a different team and setup. And so to me, it's really, if you have a football team or a soccer team, have a coach's strategy, but you also have a bunch of people out on the field. And there's a bit of a chicken and egg going on there of strategy to people, but you got to take some of the constraints that you're living in and then go build a team around it. But understanding what those things are, okay, and how they work is how you know scheduling really well and can talk to schedulers and interact, because if you don't lay out what some of your basic processes are, we talked about baseline schedules. Okay. How does it look in your contract? You don't ever need to open up a schedule. You can go to the specification and read, this is what the requirement is for a baseline schedule. You can read what's supposed to be provided. Okay. You can ask your scheduler, hey, they have, 6 weeks to create a baseline schedule. Planner. Let's go owner planner, right? I'm setting up an owner planner's team, go to my owner planner scheduler, and I say, we have 6 weeks to do. How do we know the contractor is going to make that 6 weeks? Okay. Never opened up a schedule. One of the most powerful questions you can ask. Okay. What sort of meetings are there? What sort of presentations? How do I know this is going to get delivered on time?
Yeah, one of the most, I think, accurate definitions of a planner/scheduler that I've heard, and this was actually, I think, back in season 1 of Project Chatter, Mr. Micah Piippo.
Back when you had hair.
Back when I had hair on my head. He actually offered up a definition which always stuck with me, is that the planner is just a project manager that looks after time. And so if you're a planner/scheduler and I'm going to use the word scheduler, just FYI, because I'm in the UK.
Hey, welcome to America. Let's get rid of the word planner.
And if you're the planner on a project, you should be able to step in for the PM, the project manager, at any given point in time. You should know the project that well. And that was an interesting concept.
I don't mean to interrupt your flow there, but the opposite should be true. The project manager should be able to step in for the planner.
Yes.
And I think most planners that are worth their salt can do that. I would say the vast majority of project managers could not do that because, one, they just get too frazzled by Primavera P6, but two, they don't have an understanding of what's actually going on across that side of the fence. They haven't looked into that process like the baseline process you're talking about. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. Keep going.
No. Well, that brings me to another question I had, because you said that, scheduling is just a mathematical equation. So how good at
schedule is?
Yeah.
Scheduling is a social activity. But keep going.
Okay. But still, right? Because
you can't pin me down. I move and dance.
Yeah, but because it's a mathematical equation, as a scheduler or as a world-class scheduler that doesn't open the schedule, how well do you have to understand mathematics versus the maths that the schedule uses?
That's a great question. I think that's kind of where I was going to next of, well, like, how do you review a schedule? Because let's say you get the processes and the people and the tools, but how does someone actually review a schedule? And I think it's very, very simple. To go through and do a really, really great job reviewing it without ever opening Primavera P6 or understanding, the classic network diagram and you calculate total float by hand. And I'm not saying anyone shouldn't do that or try and understand it. I just, at this point, with the technology we have available and the resources that are probably at your fingertip, I don't know if it's a great utilization of time. Schedule review. Number one, be able to find the schedule milestones and compare them to the contractual milestones. This is going to read very similar. I think I did like a Mr. Beast style post where I was like, how do you review a schedule in 30 seconds, like 1 minute, 3 minutes, 5 minutes? And it's going to follow very much that same pattern where if I was given very limited time, you look at the contractual milestones, you find where they're at in the contract, you look at the schedule and you compare where you're going with that, right? And you see, do they line up? Okay. Now, that, like with anything, there's a point in time analysis. The best way to do that is to trend everything over time, because that's how things work, right? How things are flowing, moving, and milestones pulling in, pulling out, right? Great stuff to ask your scheduler. Don't try and create it yourself. So contractual milestones. The next one I go to, and this is where this is the project manager's superpower, is the scope of the schedule in the schedule. Sorry, the scope of the project in the schedule. Because a project manager and project director, they know everything. Oh, the water tank on the east side of the building connects into this trestle, and this trestle ties into this water pipe. If you're a good project manager, good director, you know the project. Go make sure it's in the schedule. That is as simple as pulling open that PDF and reading down the line. Weird. I don't see that generator that's supposed to be there. Or this is missing out of the schedule. Where is it? Okay. So you've covered contractual milestones. You've covered the scope of the project. The next one you can start looking at is duration. So just as a heads up, there's a couple different duration columns that are in P6. There's original duration, what it was estimated as. There's remaining duration. So if there's any actual duration, this is what's left over, right? And there's actual duration. So if you're looking at a PDF, make sure you talk to your scheduler and say, this is all really confusing. I don't know why P6 didn't do this. Can you just give me the duration of the activity? Go try and find out if these durations look accurate. The first thing you can do, very simple tactic. If they're all in multiples of 5, you know someone's pulling the wool over your eyes. I've worked on a lot of construction projects. I've done a lot of things in my life, and nothing is always in multiples of 5, right? So the second one is start to ask about how these durations were formed. Okay. It's one of my favorite questions of all time in a schedule review. How did you come up with this duration? It should dive back into mathematical calculations at some point. Cubic feet installed, tons per day, whatever have you. Design, it can be hours. You don't need to get to 100% down to every single duration figured out that way, but just, critical task, critical path, things that's important to you. Okay. The next layer down after that I'd go to is logic. Okay. This is where you're going to get into you're going to need your scheduler's help, and you will need some help pulling it out because it's nearly impossible to follow on a piece of paper. I've really liked using nodes and links lately. Super easy to trace logic. There's lots of software out there that does it for you, but couple first critical paths. In your gut, does that feel like a critical path? Yes or no? Okay. You go down the list just following total float and go find those. Okay. So now you have the logic done. The last one is you run it through a schedule quality check. Now, schedule quality, I would say, is at the bottom of my list. And the reason why is because if your contractual milestones 3 months late, who cares how many constraints you have, right? You have bigger fish to fry. And you can go down that list I went down and you would probably say, yes, that's much more important. You can check your schedule quality. This is an automated report that almost any pieces of software runs, but you just want to make sure that algorithm is healthy. Okay. If a project manager sat down and in a baseline review and in a couple project updates did the review I just said, they would do the same review that, a senior planner, a senior schedule review would do that's getting paid hundreds of dollars per hour and be about 90% there. And so to me, that is pretty much world class.
So loads of questions as you're explaining, then I think some fantastic tips that people will take away. But for those that don't know, critical path, many people think they understand what it is. And there is a mathematical definition of what the critical path is. But how would you define it? Because often I think
the internet where anything can be defined as you see fit.
The reason I ask this, right, is because when you say critical path, it's because it's got the word critical in it. It almost demands focus, like focus on this path.
Well, they made it red. They made the line red,
Exactly, as well. Now, we know that there's a mathematical reason of why that is the critical path. But then you brought up another word there called float, and often that is misunderstood. And something that's closely linked to scheduling is risk management. And so often risks can occur on the secondary or third path. That's not the critical path, but because we focused only on the critical path or mainly on the critical path, we're blindsided by this major risk that has a high probability of impacting the schedule and blowing it out. So this is why I ask, do you have a definition of critical path that allows us to consider there's more than just the one path?
Well, yeah. I could pull up the PMI and internet and read you off the definition, but here's what we need to grasp. When I was talking about the review, I said your couple critical paths. Okay. So if you look it up in a book right now, and if you ask, I interview hundreds of people, they'll all tell you it's the path where if you move an activity, it moves the project end date, right? Great. That will have zero total float on it typically. Okay. Which is a whole other side conversation. You probably should have some contingency on your schedule, but we're going to go too long on it. The reason why I said critical paths, because like you said, And that's why I told the project manager that I was asking to do this, that is one idea of what is driving the project finish. Okay. There are going to be hundreds of potential, thousands of potential ways that path could change and that other paths could become more important. I come from the data center field. I'll use data center example, right? Most typically, power will be your critical path. You can't run stuff if you don't have power. However, closely behind that will be the mechanical gear usually, because that's how you cool the data center. So hypothetically speaking, let's say power's going great and then the fans, the MAHs are delayed. That path will now be the critical path, the one critical path. But to me, I think it's, if I'm a project leader, here's what I'm not getting wrapped around. Okay. I'm not getting wrapped around the calculations. I'm not getting wrapped up in a total float, free float, critical path argument. I'm going to my scheduler planner and saying, listen, are they using the appropriate calculation for critical path? Okay, you can press F9 and manipulate it all you want. Okay, so I can change
Don't
those
press
bars.
F9. Don't press
Yeah.
F9.
If you want red bars, I can make them all red. Don't worry about me. I know what I'm doing here. But asking your planner or scheduler, hey, because there gets to be a point in time where the person who's the technical expert has to step in. And so when I say schedule mastery for leaders, yes, there's going to be points, and this is good stuff to be asking your scheduler. Did they calculate it correctly? Is it looking correct in P6? Cool, it is. Now it's my turn to look as the leader of this project and understand, shouldn't the electrical gear actually not be on the critical path? Because we had this whole strategy, we ran our risks and we're like, owners furnish equipment super late. So we decided to actually order it early. Shouldn't just the room be ready that the GC is responsible to be on the critical path? Because that'll happen a lot. General contractors will put owner furnished equipment on the critical path and then no one will take it off, even though it might not be. And so those are the things where you're going to get to a point where you do need that SME, but just kind of understanding and asking those questions and being confident to ask those questions and being engaged, that's where you're really going to drive your leadership home.
And you mentioned at the top of the pod these various other techniques, scheduling techniques that are sort of surfacing again. How sort of does it or does it not perhaps influence the questions we ask ourselves if we know that there's another technique like a critical chain being applied or takt time planning or whatever the case might be? Or does the questioning remain the same?
I mean, to me, it goes back to that system thing, the tools and the systems you're using. Critical chain, takt time, line of balance, lean. Those are all very, very extremely helpful techniques, and they need specific bits of information to turn them on and make them run. Critical chain, for example, is resource-based. If you don't have resource information, you can't use that to increase your project's accuracy of forecast. I'm going to tell you right now that any sort of execution-based schedule without resources is like, dude, you might as well use it as napkins for night. I don't know, right? Figure out how to, it's going to be a very high risk plan to go execute because it's a fabrication. There's nothing there that's tying it back to the real world or balancing it. And so you kind of need to know where some of these pieces fit in to really leverage them and use them. But again, a lot of these questions and the methodology I work through there, going to work for any single system you go out there and pick, and there will be, I would highly recommend all the contractors out there in the world should be using a critical chain, a lean, a takt, a line of balance. Find the right combination that fits your style of project, your team, and your culture, because those are just massively effective execution-based techniques, right? No one should be managing their L5 schedule, detailed post-level schedule, Primavera P6. To me, it's never really made sense to me. I know there's some places that work and they do it and happy for them, but that's where, I don't know, there's if you stay on LinkedIn too much, the people with the pitchforks come out and it's like an us or them, this system or not. I don't know. I saw a post the other day. Someone was like, CPM, is like killing people on sites. And I'm like, dude, how inflammatory are you trying to be? It just, it's not good for anyone. And so to me, it's as a project leader, understand some of the capabilities and processes that are out there, just like you would with anything else. You probably understand the differences in contracts between a time and material and a cost plus and all these other different types of contracts. You probably know them in and out. Just put a little time and energy and go figure out what's going on in the scheduling world.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's plenty of info out there. I think the the key of it is to apply, as you say, not just the cultural fit and what works organizationally, but the type of project you're delivering, right? Is it just a engineering design phase of a project? Is it actually putting things in the ground? Is it a software project? And you can go and find out about these things on the Project Chatter podcast or Beyond Deadlines. We've covered these topics. So go and search both podcasts and you'll learn about what these things actually mean and how to navigate your way around these various techniques. But you raised something there, Micah, that intrigued me as well around resources and the schedule. Are you suggesting resource loading a schedule? What does that actually mean, first and foremost? Or how do you define resource loading a schedule? And then there's different ways, as we know, to resource load. What would be the way that you suggest depending on the type of project you've got?
You're just trying to ask all the trigger questions, aren't you? With every question you ask, I just want to step back and put myself in the shoes of project leaders. Okay. We talked about durations and the importance of validating your durations with something. Okay. You're sitting in a room. Kevin, you say, hey, Kevin, how long is, that piece of trestle going to take? And he says 35 days. Okay. If he doesn't have any, well, why 35 days and he has nothing to it, that creates a high probability of fluctuation in his 35 days. People are naturally optimistic. Okay. So that means that 35 days could be 40, 45, 50, 65. He may have never even looked at the design and considered anything else with it. High risk of variability. So when we start talking about resource loading, I think and people go down to the well, how do you do it? Why do you do it? It's so complicated. I'm crying in P6, blah, blah, blah. Okay. We need to first ground out on how are you going to validate your durations? Okay. And why? So that usually leads me to then the next question. Okay. We want to apply some sort of resource-backed, quantity-backed something to our schedules. There is a million different ways to skin this cat. Focus on what is important and critical to your project. If you say we're resource loading every activity, you're going to waste your time on a lot of stuff that doesn't matter. Front landscaping for your project. Do you really need to know how long the sod takes? Meters of sod per week for pipes and maybe a lot of the MEP rough-in. Maybe that's not applicable for your project. So, okay, what is applicable to go out there and resource load? Then, if you would like to, okay, for certain Primavera P6 activities, you can find those resources. And so it's either quantities or hours or both. You can even put cost on them. It's all in the resource umbrella. And you can apply those to activities in your schedule. And if you want to take it a level further, you can even bell-shaped curve how they're going to forecast. Front-loaded curve, back-loaded curve, little, too far in the details, doesn't really matter. What does matter is that you're applying some math to those activities. And that's where you go to your scheduling expert and you say, hey, have you ever resource loaded a schedule before? And they'll either cry and tell you it's the worst idea ever. Or they'll be like, yeah, it's not that bad of an idea. Here's what I need to make it happen. And with anything, going back to your processes, you need to be thinking, what is the system in place that's going to keep this updated, make this function, and make this useful, and give me the insights I need to get out of it? And at the very end of it, if I did all of that stuff that Micah just said, am I actually going to act on what it's going to provide? I can't tell you the amount of projects, data center speaking specifically, where we do all of that and they're like, oh yeah, we're about 150 electricians short. Great. I don't have 150 electricians. What are you saying? I don't know. It's then you got to balance out the schedule, lay it out to what this actual productivity rate is your project's 3 months late. Great. I don't really have anything I can do. But I mean, that's being a little facetious there, but that's kind of the thought process of resource loading and how to resource load and all that good stuff.
Yeah, if I add to that, I think some of the intelligent questions in the boardroom or around the project review table is, where our critical resources are scarce resources and how are we utilizing those? Is probably some of the more intelligent questions rather than resource loading a schedule to, level 5 and on every activity. I actually feel, if you'll allow me for a minute to get on my soapbox, I think I've shared this with you offline. Why do we actually build schedules the way we build them today? Why do we have these 5,000, 10,000 line schedules when we know that's one version of how a project could be delivered? And we know that the forward pass and the backward pass and all the mathematics that is used to create a schedule with a critical path was done and created by people that had tools at their disposal at that point in time, which was what? Pen and paper. But yet we know now that we have better technology than pen and paper. And so for me, it's what you're saying is forget about the nitty gritty, the detail of how a schedule actually comes together. Let the expert do that. But think about what the schedule is there to do. The schedule is there to give you something to guide you in terms of delivering that project. So those intelligent questions of, is that in the right order? Do we have the right people and tools and equipment at the right place at the right time to deliver these things? I mean, naturally, what comes out of that is, well, the risks associated, what costs are involved, etc., etc. But it's really interesting because Val and I actually had this triggers something way back when we were starting this podcast. Val and I actually had a debate in one of the episodes on, he felt that it doesn't actually matter in the grand scheme of things, but it was great to have a debate recorded so everyone could hear it. He felt that resource loading and cost loading were exactly the same thing. And I said, no, they weren't. Yeah, I know. I looked at him the same way you just looked at me when I said that. But depending on... Go ahead.
I'll sit in the middle of your debate. Yeah, kind of you, kind of me.
Listen, there's no fence sitters over here. You got to take one side or the other on the Project Chatter podcast.
Okay. I'm sitting on the fence.
But no, it's good to have discourse and debate because that's why we put these thoughts out there, to provoke and understand what's happening. Now, the other thing that I want to put on the table around scheduling, and you mentioned there the sort of the GC view versus the owner view in the UK, client and contractor. What sits in the middle of that, which you alluded to, are different types of contracts. Okay. And as you're saying there, often the planner needs to understand the project, the technical side. They need to work with all different departments. They also need to understand commercially what happens. But I find that contract administrators, commercial managers often don't understand planning or scheduling. And so if I just put on a contract lens, what would be, I know you mentioned there are milestones in the contract. Is there anything else that I should be looking at? Because if there's delays, if there's claims happening, what are some of the things I'm looking at in the schedule that'll help me?
Yeah, it depends how much time you have. Contracts are massive documents. But it's a good point. It's something, people should be aware of. So typically you'll see the schedule pop up in two different points in the contract. There are a litany of contracts out there, but if you're looking kind of the standard one that includes some sort of planning and scheduling. One, I'll call it like the base set, or I don't know if there's a formal word for it, but in like the short version of the contract, there is typically a 1 or 5 to 10 milestones that says these are the delivery dates of the project. I mean, that's in almost every contract. It says this is when it needs to be done by. And sometimes it's one milestone or there's a couple others. Okay. That's in the base. And then they'll have specifications or guidance, or there's a ton of different names for them. But this is where it goes into what is actually required for the scheduling process. This can be, I think I was reading one specification 150 pages long, and some they're like a couple pages long. But it's going to, on the client side, it's going to mandate this is the tool you need to use, Primavera P6. This is how you're going to use the tool. This is what are the processes dictating it for a baseline, for a project update. This is the reports you need to provide to send in. If there's a delay, this is how it's going to be happened. This is how a TIA is submitted. This is the process in which it goes to review. This is the as-built project of it closing out. It covers a multitude of things, and it can get very, very granular and detailed, like 175 pages, or it can get shorter. The thing that is the most important thing to understand for project leaders, especially on the client side, is your job isn't to make the contractor have a gotcha. You're not trying to, I'll get all this. And I've seen a lot of times where people will read through specifications, go through a bad project, and immediately, LDs, we got to have LDs. That's how we get them. What you really want to do when you set this up, and definitely you want to protect yourself. Can't argue that. You want to, make sure that you're covered, but you're also trying to teach the contractor what you want and how you want it done. So put yourself in their shoes for a hot minute, look through their eyes and look at your own stuff and say, can I reasonably pick this up and figure it out? Or do I have a 175 page manual about who knows what? And build a specification and guidance that you would want to help you get going. That typically includes templates, examples, and easy to read stuff. Your specification doesn't have to be written in legal language. It can just be written in plain language. All of those things help people pick up and start building schedules for you faster. And that's the name of the game.
It's an interesting one. And as you say, we could talk for hours on contracts and schedules and NEC with accepted programs and rejected and all these various permutations. But I think as you're saying, if you're looking...
We delivered the project and the baseline on the same day.
Exactly. But ultimately, I think what you're saying there is, whether you GC or owner, you're actually delivering the same project. Don't forget that. It's the same outcome that you want, a successfully delivered project. And keeping that in mind, I was very privileged to host a roundtable on project intelligence talking about, GC and owner communication, how not, and I'm assuming here, based on what you're saying, it happens in the States, but in the UK, they're quite commercial, these conversations, right? They're commercially charged. And actually, if you take that away and go, there's no commercial angle, which is very difficult, I know, because we live in a capitalist world. But if you take that away and you go, well, what's the outcome we actually want here for all parties? What's the win-win? You actually get to a solution quicker, and you have a representation of your project in a schedule form that gives everyone a fighting chance of actually it being delivered. So you'll have the gives and the gets represented accurately between the contractor and the clients as well. So there's lots of hints and tips. But look, I know that, 45 odd minutes isn't enough to cover everything, Micah. So you're just getting started. No, what you are, I mean, people can listen to you for weeks. You've got multiple episodes out there. So do go and check out the Beyond Deadlines podcast, folks. Such a plethora of information. Or reach out to Micah directly. But look, we are heading towards the end of the pod, Micah. Were there any other hints, tips, ideas, suggestions that you want to share to be a world-class scheduler without
super quick, two things that project leaders can do. The first one, learn how to forecast with data. This is very, very simple. There's 3 or 4 basic schedule metrics. You can track your activity starts, how well an activity starts on time, activity finishes. You can track the duration. But anyways, you aggregate that information up, simple average, and you can apply that to your project duration. I call this manager math. If you have a 10-month project and you're delivering your activities, you're starting 50% of the time and your duration's 50% of the time, you don't have a 10-month project, you probably have a 15-month project, right? And if you aren't looking through those lenses, lots of things are going to come out and surprise you. So I would just say, figure out how to forecast, leverage your planner and scheduler to do it. And then the last one, which we probably should have talked about first, commissioning. And I know that's a whole other episode, but all I will say is please, 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 on your next project, okay, get your commissioning plan early as possible. And here's the deal. I'm talking about 2 things here. Number 1, yes, there's the actual sequence in which you start up the building. There's this generator to that and this, and blah, 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 right? Okay, that's one thing. And you can't do that until a lot of the design's finished. Cool, got it. Second thing is how you're actually going to manage commissioning, which you can do today, right now. How is the data going to integrate? Because hypothetically, let's say you're using Primavera P6, and that's going to go connect to a commissioning software, or you're absolutely insane and you're going to commission your schedule in P6. If you want to do that, how is that data integration going to work? What's the cadence of that? And at the end of the day, all commissioning usually comes down to a set of equipment tags or whatever you call it. What is that burn down list going to look like? That is always considered so far late, setting up the actual system. Oh yeah, I think we'll do it in like P6 and then it breaks, or I'm going to tie it to this commissioning system and it breaks. And now you're fighting like 5,000 fires, plus you're working with IT to solve a software problem. So 2 other things that I recommend with people: figure out how to forecast using data. It's not mysterious superpower. It's very helpful for your own project's end. And then also look at commissioning. Dial in on that early. If you can get that out of the way, it's just one less thing that's going to, be a thorn in your side later on.
Absolutely. Begin with the end in mind. It's what springs to mind for me. But that's awesome, Micah. Like I said at the top of the pod, thank you for everything you're sharing with the project community in terms of the thoughts, the ideas, the challenge. You certainly put a lot out there on LinkedIn that gets people thinking and puts things into perspective as well. The reasons you do it is similar to why we do the Project Chatter podcast, is to share and grow the community. So thank you for that. And it's been a real privilege to have you back on the pod, and we hope to have you again sharing some of your wisdom and some of your nuggets with our
I just
audiences.
joke 'cause I'm trying to just get people on the word scheduler. I don't, or just get rid of the word planner because I just tell, kidding. I'm kidding. I'm joking. I know. I love doing it. Please come interact LinkedIn, comment, like, provide recommendations. If you come watch Beyond Deadlines, you want us to cover a topic that's in planning and scheduling, happy to do that for you. Just reach out.
Absolutely. I think that the reason, because you're wanting to get rid of planner, the word planner,
I'm just kidding.
I don't think you're allowed back into the UK.
Oh
Just
no.
saying.
Visa just got revoked.
But no, look, it's been great to have you. Like I say, real privilege to have you back on the Project Chatter podcast. Thank you so much for your time, Micah. And yeah, well, I'll keep listening to the Beyond Deadlines podcast, and so should you listeners. So that is all the time we have, folks, for this episode. But if you like what you've heard, please do help us pay it forward and share a link to this episode on your favorite social media. Once again, a massive thank you to our guest, Micah Piippo, and thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From us, it's bye for now.